Specialized in operations. Unredacted. Rachel Marsden. Lifting the reveal the covert information and intelligence around global events. And now, here is your host, Rachel Marsden.
All right, how's everybody doing today? I'm Rachel Marsden. I'm your host. This is Unredacted. This is an episode about a 6-year hiatus. I have some explaining to do, I think, over that. This show was a very successful independent show on the air for a couple of years. Back when the technology was just absolutely different and far more primitive. Monetization was virtually non-existent. The platforms were very limited. The idea of just putting something together on one platform and then feeding it into a million streams, scattering it to the e-wind, I guess you could say, into cyberspace was also pretty much unheard of. So we're in a new era, and I've been meaning to do this for the last, I don't know how many years now, about 2-3 years, but I've just been so insanely busy. As I said, I'm based in Paris, France, but I travel all over the world. I'm an international political and business intelligence expert, and I write columns and do independent shows that air on various media platforms, that have aired on various media platforms over the past several years. I also at one point was a co-host of a nightly talk show on the Fox News channel called Red Eye. Some of you might have heard of it. It's no longer on the air. It's kind of had a few different incarnations and turned into something else. And most recently, and the reason why I was unable to do this show for so long is because I was the host of a French language show produced by an independent production company that was licensed by Sputnik France, which is a media that's associated, partly funded by the Russian state. It's actually a French media outlet, but it gets some of its funding from the Russian state. Now, for those of you who've been following recently what's been going on in the news with respect to the Russia-NATO standoff in Ukraine, which is essentially what it is, even though it's often portrayed as a war between Russia and Ukraine, Ukraine is the meat puppet for NATO in this. I'll get into that, I'm sure, ad nauseum over the course of the next few episodes, because all of our guests are going to have something to say about that over the next few days. But when the European Union decided to start sanctioning Russia, they also decided to start censoring media outlets, which means that independent media productions that were licensed by those networks in any country, either in the US or in the EU, eventually they all just took a collective decision to allow the GAFA, so Google, Apple, Facebook, YouTube, basically any of the major platforms to just simply block us within the country. So first, the EU took a collective decision, so it was blocked within all of the EU countries, and then the US. Well, I think I don't think the American government has taken that decision, well, not yet. I know that people in Canada are calling for it, but they essentially decide to, on their own, block access within those countries. So you can't get my show, my French language show on YouTube. My independent show licensed by the platform of a Russian media network, you cannot view it. But I can still express my opinions as that independent journalist on other platforms. So that's what I'm doing with this show. And that's what I do with other media outlets that I do work for and that the production company that I'm associated with licenses to. So there are still other options, which is why I'm here with you guys today. So, wild times. Anybody interested in taking a trip somewhere? Get away from all this COVID nonsense, which, by the way, it looks like it's gearing up again, in case you thought it was over. Germany just announced, I was just reading before I came on the air, that the cases are going up in Germany. It's like a roller coaster. And here in France, we just took our masks off in stores. I mean, my chin warmer is no longer. You have to wear them on public transit, but unless somebody freaks out, and there are people who are freaking out. There are people in the stores who are still wearing masks, even though you don't have to wear the masks anymore. I'm going to be honest with you. I had COVID, the OG. I had the original COVID about a year ago. And I didn't really notice. I did notice at some point. I'll tell you what happened. It was dead of winter, beginning of February. I felt kind of run down. I just thought, it's winter, it's dark. Nobody has any energy. It's totally for me, it's totally normal. And usually I get some kind of cold or something around that time of year, every single year anyway. So I was just kind of feeling a little tired. And plus we had this 6 p.m. curfew, which meant that you had to get everything done by 5 p.m. It was rush hour like crazy, the COVID curfew that we had in France. So it was kind of nuts. And I just thought I was just run down. So I was working like crazy and just like really pushing myself. But then at one point, by the way, I was also swimming 6 to 7 kilometers a day because I trained as a top level master swimmer in France. So I had that going. 6-7 kilometers a day with 2 hours per day. And at one point I was eating a pack of candy and it tasted like somebody forgot to put the sugar in. And I was like, oh, wow. Okay, well, that's might be something. And it dawned on me, that's when the light bulb went off, right? Like maybe this is COVID. Too late to do any test. I mean, I'd been living a normal life, right? So I went off. It's not really important. I'm not really bothered by it. A couple of months later, I got an antibody test, and sure enough, tons of antibodies. I had COVID. So that was my brief and uneventful experience with COVID. And I know since then it's kind of had a few other iterations. I know there's a British variant and all the other ones. I don't know. Now I don't know what it is, a cold, but really, I mean, I know people who've had it recently and nobody here is really under the age of 60 is really sick from it. So just tired and whatever. So anyway, that was my experience with that. And it looks like that might be gearing up again. But hey, if you want to get away, maybe Russia's a good place to go. Moscow. Actually, it's a lot like London, cleaner. Maybe for those of you who speak English, a little more complex in terms of communication, a little more challenging, but it's cheap right now because the ruble is in the tank. So already it's a pretty good deal, and you get giant Vegas size hotel rooms for a really good price. They, can't get anywhere else. If you're here in France, it's a 3-4 hour flight. Although right now it's complicated because airspace is closed to Russian airlines and nobody's flying there except European airlines are not going there. So you literally have to take Turkish Airlines. They must be just like ching, ching, because I don't know. I think Air Serbia has one flight there, but you have to go to Istanbul and then back over. So instead of 4 hours, it's 7 or 8, I think. But hey, I think COVID's over there. Well, for all intents and purposes, in the sense that I think they canceled all the QR codes, all that stuff. I don't even really think it took hold there for very many things. It was very limited application. They tried initially in Moscow, and from what I understand, it was 3 weeks, and people they all just rejected it. They stopped going out. So they thought, oh, we have to build a more strategic in our application. So yeah, so a cheap trip to Moscow if you want to go there. It might take you a little longer to get there, but now might be the time to check it out. It's way cheap, good deals, Or I think the Vladimir Zelensky tour company might be willing to give you a free trip to Lviv, which is in Western Ukraine. To the staging area, if you want to participate, he'll give you, if you want to participate in the event that he's holding now in his country, I guess you could call it that. I mean, you can't say he's a non-involved party in this, in the sense that he's literally inviting foreigners to come and fight for Ukraine and giving them weapons and sending them out. So, hey, it might be a one-way trip, but I don't know. I think they're paying for it. I don't know if it's free. From what I understand, you just go to the embassy in your country and you just say, I want to fight for Ukraine. And I think you get to go. But I was reading recently that there are some firsthand accounts floating around up there of people who I guess had these Rambo fantasies of going and smoking Russians in Ukraine. I guess these are maybe mall cops who maybe, when Blackwater was unable to scale up successfully from special forces personnel, maybe they were recruited and had a great time hanging out in the green zone in Iraq and thought, hey, Garden Paul Bremer in the green zone, kind of cushy. I mean, there was that Nisour Square thing, but that was only a small group of them. The rest of them are probably having the time of their lives, being paid a fortune. And this whole idea of being paid, from what I understand, $2,000 US a day to go fight for Ukraine on the invitation of Vladimir Zelensky, the president of Ukraine right now, might sound like a good deal. And maybe some people want to relive their Blackwater type days. Let's just face reality. You're mercenaries, and you'll be treated in combat or war or this operation or whatever you want to call it, like an enemy combatant. Apparently, there are some people who arrived there thinking that they would be given uniforms and integrated into some kind of a organized battalion, instead of just being shoved out to the front lines to act as a cushion between the Russians and the Ukrainian forces. So people are getting a rude awakening. It's not a video game, guys, but hey, might be a fun trip for some of you. I don't know. For some people, that's what went through their head, and they went, I'm game. We're getting the band together, with Blackwater guys together or whatever, and going back out there. And I don't know. Even if you're paid $2,000 a day, I don't think they're going to be spending that much money on you, frankly, given the way that, well, for example, I think it was last night, depending on where you are in the world. In France, it would be our last night. I think it was 20 or 30 missiles struck a staging area for the foreign fighters. So people, it sounds like a really bad idea to go and do that with your time. Might be other things going on, but, and let's face it, this is the same blueprint we've seen so many times over. This whole idea of Ukrainian rebels. They're not calling them that. You notice that? It's not even, they're just calling them Ukrainian forces. But I'll tell you the story behind that. There's a really long history. Anybody who thinks this started on the 24th or what day did the Russians launch their operation? The 24th of February. Anybody who thinks it started on the 24th of February, we're going to get into that with my next guest. He's coming on probably in the next 10 minutes if he finishes his media hit with the French radio station beforehand. But I can remember being in Toronto, Canada. I'm from Canada, by the way. I'm from Vancouver originally, but haven't lived there in years. But around 2004, 2005, being in Toronto and being asked by a Western political consultant who did a lot of international political consulting, if I wanted to be involved in a project in Ukraine, to back the pro-West candidate. Here we are 18 years later, and not much has changed. Ukraine is an outpost of the State Department. In 2014, there was a president who had been elected who was took more of a middle ground between the tug of war that's constantly going on in Ukraine between the NATO Western sphere and the Russian sphere. And the president at the time had won the election. The president who had won the election was a middle ground kind of guy. And he was asked to sign a cooperation agreement with the European Union, which would have been a first step to probably integrating Ukraine in the EU. I think that was kind of the idea. And he refused at the last minute. And that's when the troubles began. And essentially a covert war was launched in the West, in Kiev, by, let's just say, protests mounted by the US aid money and the foreign aid money that's come in from the West, the helicopter money for Ukraine from the West for foreign aid, essentially a lot of it going to civil society groups to drum up that kind of activity, protest activity. It's a classic model that you see in many countries. So when that all broke out, the people on the border with Russia started freaking out. Those are people they're Ukrainian, but their language is Russian, their culture is Russian. I mean, Ukraine being a giant country and then being on the border with Russia, you can kind of visualize what you get in terms of a society. It's like, I'm Canadian. I grew up in Vancouver on the border of the US. And granted, our media is quite similar, but there are some differences, but there is a strong influence, cultural influence, right? So you can imagine it's the same kind of thing with that area on the border with Russia. Well, they freaked out when they saw that the president had fled, right? It was a coup d'etat, and president had fled, and they were worried about what might come next. And they had good reason, because for the last 8 years, they've been shelled constantly by the Ukrainian forces, and by people who have been trained to put pressure on them and to just harass them for the last 8 years because of their affinity with Russia. There's a certain amount of recognition by the Ukrainian government for them as independent republics, and Russia just recently recognized, or special regions or something like that. But Ukraine essentially gave them some amount of autonomy while still considering them part of Ukraine. So Russia basically fully recognized them recently, and then said, look, they're to be protected because they've been facing this carnage for the last 8 years. And meanwhile, the West has been building up their Ukrainian rebels. Same model as they did with Syria and Libya, where they go in and train a bunch of fighters to do the dirty work on their behalf against whoever it is that they're interested in putting pressure on. And the Azov Battalion, Sloboda, Right Sector. An article came out in the Ottawa Citizen not too long ago in Canada explaining that the Canadian military, I think it came out in November of last year, if I'm not mistaken, the Canadian military is now investigating how the Canadian trainers who went to Ukraine ended up training the Azov battalion neo-Nazis, anti-Russians, who were later integrated into the Ukraine military, which is another point that I find kind of interesting. If you're a member of the Ukrainian military and suddenly a bunch of guys, like 800, show up and they're a bunch of neo-Nazis with no professional training beyond a bunch of Western military trainers sent to your country to train them, now saying, oh, well, hey, here are your new comrades. Would you be cool with that? I don't know. I mean, if I was a Ukrainian soldier, I'd find that weird and maybe start asking some questions, maybe blow the whistle somewhere about that. Instead, everybody's fine, right? Like the Syrian rebels, everybody was fine with jihadists fighting against Assad in Ukraine. Hey, everybody's fine about a bunch of like neo-Nazis trained by NATO countries for the last several years to suddenly start fighting on the front lines against like conventional Russian forces going in to try to, let's just face it, Russia is trying to get rid of the US State Department outpost in Ukraine. All of the weapons that have been sent, they struck all the depots. All of the fighters that have been trained by Western trainers, those neo-Nazis, the Azov Group Battalion, for example, they're trying to get rid of that influence. Zelensky makes things worse by flooding the country with weapons, giving everybody semi-automatic weapons, and then going, I think we want to join the EU. Well, I don't know any EU country that's ever been given ascension to membership after distributing semi-automatic rifles to everybody and after integrating a bunch of neo-Nazis into their army trained by foreign countries. And now he keeps asking for a no-fly zone. Yeah. I mean, let's just guarantee World War III, right? Hey, I got some questions coming in here. A couple from LinkedIn. I can't really have everything. If you guys only saw the setup I have here, I have to get a better setup. But it's a question from somebody on LinkedIn. Don't you think that in the pandemic, many countries issue money internally, and now that they have to retire this money and the Ukraine, Russia is a good opportunity to raise prices globally to tackle the extra money, which would have to be solved by increasing prices, including their involved tax. Okay. And making the people poor. Okay. I get it. Thank you for your question, which if I, just to paraphrase, if I think I understand it right, how convenient that suddenly we're over the pandemic, everybody's broke, and we have an arms race, literally another arms race. And it's not even a Cold War this time. It's like a lukewarm war, let's just say, bordering on hot, maybe. But yeah, I mean, I'm not big into cause. I think correlation is what you're asking about there. I just think either these guys are, well, let's just say they're two separate issues. I think it's a convenient fact that suddenly there's going to be a bunch of arms sales. Like suddenly everybody needs to like, I don't know, acquire. Germany just announced that they wanted to get a whole bunch of F-35 fighter jets from the US. That's an interesting point. Really interesting point. I've been thinking about that. I just heard about it today, but I was thinking about that. You know why? Because Germany has a very interesting position with respect to what's going on right now between Russia and NATO in Ukraine. Because all of the sanctions that have been taken in the last couple of weeks since all of this popped off, all the sanctions which were taken by the EU, adopted by the EU, including the ones that hit my show in French here, it resulted in knocking it off the air until this is over. They also harm Europe. Well, connected. I mean, look at your gas. That's the most obvious example, but there's more examples than just that. I mean, all sorts of projects. France is the number one investor in Ukraine, in Russia. So there's all projects that the French industry has that it makes money from, and all that's frozen right now. And then Germany, going back to the F-35s, Germany has 70% of Germany's gas comes from Russia. 40% of Europe's does. So it's impacted. There's less exposure of the rest of Europe outside of Germany to Russian gas. Now, that's why Germany wanted the Nord Stream 2 pipeline to take gas from Germany, or to take gas from Russia to Europe through Germany. And that was a Russian-Germany project. And the US blocked it months and months and months ago by imposing sanctions on it. And I think there has since been, especially with the stuff going on with Russia right now between the EU and NATO and the US and Russia, Olaf Scholz, who's the new chancellor of Germany, took over a few months ago from Angela Merkel. He flat out said, after the sanctions were applied, we need Russian gas. It's not negotiable. And then, when I thought, well, good luck trying to convince the Americans to permit you and the EU, and don't think they don't consult on these things. The EU doesn't make decisions without consulting the White House. They just never have. It's a transatlantic thing. They just never have. I thought, good luck trying to convince the White House to lift sanctions on Nord Stream 2 and to allow you to have Russian gas. But then suddenly Germany decides magically today to announce that they want to buy 40, if I'm not mistaken, I don't have the number right in front of me, 40 F-35 American fighter jets, and not French Rafale fighter jets. Why? Could it be a card that I'm just speculating here, I don't know for sure, but could it be a card that they're offering in exchange for maybe loosening of ideological positions with respect to Russian gas and the dependence of Europe on it? I know that Biden said, we're going to create North American energy dependence. We're going to stop importing Russian gas. Well, it would have been great if you would have authorized the Keystone XL pipeline, because that's something that would have guaranteed North American energy dependence. For whatever reason, it's, environmental, to appeal to his environmental buddies, and more than that, hey. The alternative to the Keystone XL that would have guaranteed North American energy dependence is basically owned lock, stock, and barrel by a bunch of guys who are Democratic donors, including Warren Buffett, known Democratic Party donor. And there's there's a couple others who are invested in the alternatives, like the British North American BNSF, British something Santa Fe Railway. But anyway, it's the alternative to the Keystone XL pipeline, and it would have taken business away from them. Democratic donors, big Democratic donors. And there's also some of the big donors donate to NGOs, environmental NGOs in the States, who then get involved with Canadian NGOs that protest against these projects in Canada that would link up Canada and the US increasingly and guarantee energy independence. All of that was a problem. All that was locked up until now. And now Biden's like, hey, now we have to do it. Interesting. So be damned, ecological considerations suddenly. That's interesting. Now it doesn't really matter. It's all about beating Russia. That's a huge 180. But Europe is going to get screwed if they can't get Russian gas. So What if they're throwing the US a bone by saying, fine, we'll buy a few dozen fighter jets? Odd that all this is coming out now, isn't it? All right, so I've got some interesting feedback here from some LinkedIn users talking about devil hiding in the details. I don't really know what that is. If you can give me a little more info, that would be great. By the way, please feel free to any kind of information, to links that you want me to talk about, or little facts that you found or interesting. Basically, I have a guest that's supposed to be coming up in the next any minute now. He's supposed to be logging on. I hope he hasn't gotten lost somewhere. But I've got a bunch of links that I'm going to throw up on the screen right now too, if you want to check out some of my other platforms. This show, by the way, is going to air 3 times a week, I think. This is the first show of the new season, the old season, if some of you are just joining us now, or 6 years ago. And it's before I got overwhelmed. But I thought, it's a good time to start this thing back up again, for obvious reasons. Because I've had a lot of people send me emails saying, hey, or just messages saying, what's going on? What's happening in the world? What's going on with Ukraine? Should we be concerned? Should we be concerned? I think it's going to have a huge impact on the New World Order. And I know that's a loaded term, right? You hear New World Order and people are just like, oh my God, what's she talking about? Sounds like a conspiracy theory when you talk about New World Order. No, I mean, New World Order just means we've gone from a unipolar world where the US is dominant post-Cold War. It was the only superpower. And now we're looking at multipolar, like a multipolar dynamic that's developing increasingly so, and more so in the financial sector rather than just in a political sense, because you have, and I think this conflict is going to lead to a lot more of it. I think it's going to intensify and greater integrate, I guess, enshrine a multipolar global dynamic, especially because you have Europe. And like I said, Europe, I think, is shooting itself in the foot. The US has less exposure to it, but still cutting Russia off the SWIFT system. What do you think they're going to do? Just sit on their hands and go, well, that sucks. That sucks. No. They're going to create all sorts of alternatives. I mean, the idea of saying to Russians, well, you guys heard what happened to Facebook, right? With Facebook and Instagram, as of yesterday, Russians can't use Facebook and Instagram because Facebook had this brilliant idea. I don't know where they got this from. It was just, I can't imagine what was going through their minds, but they, for all of their censoring of, bad words and heterodox thinking or politically incorrect thought, anybody who says something that doesn't fit too well within the conventional narrative on Facebook faces a ban, right? Kind of like YouTube and the other GAFA major hosting platforms. Well, Facebook suddenly decided it would be okay to call for violence against Russian President Vladimir Putin and against Russian forces. And Russia just went, yeah, no, sorry. So that resulted in their ban. I don't know how this is going to end. I've got more people on chat here. I'm waiting for my guest to come on. Okay, I've here Mark. I know Mark. He is a absolute expert. He's living in Georgia right now, but I've had him on my French show. Mark is saying, what about Putin becoming the champion of European dissidents, those who are fighting against the Davos and Chicago school ideologies? Oh, Mark, I'm going to have you on the show to talk about this. This is the problem, guys. I only have an hour for this show. My guest is not here yet. And it's seems like things are just humming along pretty well anyway, right? I mean, we've been on the air 40 minutes talking about everything that's going on. I haven't even made a dent yet. I don't know how much that's going to serve Vladimir Putin to be the champion of European dissidents if they're cut off from everything. They're going to have to build all of their own infrastructure to platform those dissenting voices, I guess you could say. But what Mark brings up a really good point. What we're heading towards right now, and we have been heading towards at the speed of a freight train up till now, but it's just accelerating with this new stuff in Ukraine, is just an absolute push towards a one-track conventional way of thinking that excludes largely other points of view or does not provide them with the same access. And it's kind of a trap because digital was supposed to be the great hope, right? It was supposed to give everybody a voice, supposed to democratize public opinion. And what's happening is we're going in the other direction, where there's more and more censorship of dissenting views on those platforms. So, all right. I think I see that my guest is here, Emmanuel Dupuy. Yes. Okay. Well, we're gonna take Emmanuel on the show. I'll let you know exactly what's going on. Hey,
okay.
How you doing?
Hello. I'm sorry to be late. Yes, I can hear you.
Yeah.
I hope you can see me and hear me. Can you hear me as well?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, I'm sorry.
So I'm
sorry for the audience. I was with another radio show.
Oh, they knew. It's okay. It's no problem. I have no problem talking. I used to do 4-hour radio shows in New York. And sometimes if there are no callers, you have to talk on your own, right? So I'm used to that. It's no problem. But I'm going to tell the audience who you are, Emmanuel, because we've known each other for many years now through my show here in France. And it's such an honor to have you on as my very first guest of my very first episode of the
I'm delighted and honored as well.
All right, so I'm going to tell the audience who you are. Emmanuel Dupuy is the president of the Institute for Prospective and Security in Europe. I had to think about that because I had to do the French translation, but it's pretty much exactly the same.
Yes, so foresight. Prospective would be foresight.
Right. In that sense, yeah, because it's funny because that term is used a lot more in French than it is in English, but I understand it, from an analyst's point of view that it means that. And but the audience is really, I'm getting a lot of questions here about Ukraine. So we've been talking about Ukraine for the last 40 minutes. That's obviously the topic of the day, even though it looks like COVID is surging again in Germany. That may be another topic for another day again. But here's the thing, Emmanuel. It's like people are trying to figure out why this is happening now and why it seems to be coming out of nowhere when it really hasn't. I mean, I was explaining to the audience that back when I was living in Toronto in 2004-05, I was approached by an international political consultant in North America to work on a pro-Western candidates campaign in Ukraine. It seems like Ukraine has always, or at least for the last couple of decades, acted as an outpost for the State Department. And it seems like what we're seeing right now in Ukraine is a standoff between the US and their NATO allies on one side and Russia on the other, with Ukraine basically being a table. And going back to Syria, for example, with Bashar al-Assad, there was a big argument way back during that conflict where people were saying Assad should go even if there's no coup d'etat, even if he's not unseated through war. He should go because he's failed to manage the country and to prevent the rebels from coming in and from it descending into mayhem. I guess the same argument could be used for Zelensky with respect to the Azov battalion, with respect to all the foreign countries coming in and foreign military trainers training those mercenaries who are now fighting the Russians within the country. I don't know, it just seems like a big mess. But for you, what strikes you with respect to this conflict? I know you're really involved with analyzing various world conflicts, but where do you place this?
Well, I would not have the same perspective as you. First of all, because it's not only a war between the United States, NATO, and Russia. It's a game changer with Russia and the Oriental partnership in which this is going. This has been going since the beginning of the invasion of the 24th of February. Ukraine is a complex country in which you have pro-Russians, in which you have anti-Russians, in which you have Russian-speaking nationalities. Of course, you must assess that 30% of the Ukrainians speak Russian before speaking Ukrainian, and therefore there's a sort of common sense of putting Russian as a second language. This is one of the 7 demands which has been made to President Zelensky. I would not argue on what you were saying about the Azov battalion, because Azov battalion, as it was mentioned, is only a battalion, and it's a very small thing. It's not
800 of them.
800.
There's 800 fighters.
Yeah, okay, but the Ukrainian army is 200.
But take with that with
200, 200.
But strike sector, Azov.
Yeah, yes, but again, they're very military. Zelensky was elected on the basis of opposing to them. Zelensky, by the way, was very pro-Russian at the beginning, or at least more pro-Russian than the Occidental candidate, which was Poroshenko, which was beaten. Yeah. So to say that it's one side against Russia is not, I think, accurate. Second of all, we must assess that all of the pro-Russian leadership, let's take Viktor Medvedchuk, the former oligarch, member of the Rada of the parliament, or Yuri Boyko, former vice prime minister of Yanukovych, or even Vitaly Klitschko, or the mayor of Vitaly Klitschko, the mayor of Kiev, or Gennady Trukhanov, the mayor of Odessa, were pro-Russians. And it's not only of having a one-sided vision of the conflict. The conflict is, of course, in historical terms, on whether or not part of Ukraine was leaning to Russia. And of course, the problem of Crimea weighs back not only in 2014, but before that, in 1992. It was already at the beginning of the independence a problem. You must assess, we must all have in mind that the Russian basis in Sebastopol was lent to Russia till 2017. So it has always been a problem. And of course, not going back to Stalin, who created Ukraine, and not going back to the hunger, not going back to the Nazi part of Ukraine, who dealt more positively with the with the Germans, who did the campaign of Crimea in 1940, 1941. I think it would be a mistake to think that Ukraine is a game in which Occidentals are playing. First of all, because the Occidentals were playing less and less in the recent years that they have done in the past, beginning of 2014, 2015. And second of all, as we all can see, United States is a bit backwards and putting the Europeans in the front line. I don't see a very harsh or very dynamic American diplomacy or an American military standoff, as you rightly mentioned, European Union.
But covert action, why would we necessarily see it? We know that they've been secretly training fighters on their behalf for their own interest. Otherwise, why would they be there? We know that the Canadian military.
Yeah, but that's not the problem. I mean,
we're training them.
What is the problem?
We know that they're there.
Yeah, of course, but everyone knows they're there. And by the way, you know the French were there as well. I mean, that's not the problem. Yeah. I mean, everyone trains everyone who wants to be trained. That's not a problem. The problem is whether or not that was a reason to invade a country. That's the problem. That's the issue. Well, otherwise, then Russia should invade Pakistan as well, or Russia should invade Afghanistan as well.
Well, the thing I thought about is if Russia started putting military bases in Vancouver, Canada, or on the border of Mexico, would the U.S. tolerate it?
Yes, there's a very big difference of creating an American basis and having special operation. You know, Americans have 100 and 70, they are present in more than, let's say 170 would be exaggerate, at least more than 150 countries in the world. That's not the issue. They're everywhere. I mean, then would that be a fuel to start wars everywhere? I don't believe that.
Well, I mean, it's one of these cases, I think, where you have to be careful what you wish for, or it's almost a self-fulfilling prophecy. How many months now have we been hearing about, well, we're sending more and more weapons to Ukraine, we're loading it up with weapons because the Russians could do something. Well, they did something. And is NATO and the West blameless? They were the ones who were loading it up with weapons. I mean, at some point, it's a catch-22, right? Which comes first, the chicken or the egg? Which comes first, the weapons on one side of the border or the bombs that have to attack it in order to prevent something bigger from happening? Like, I don't know. I mean, we're right in the middle of this still, right? I don't know what was going through the Russians' minds in terms, or what the Kremlin was thinking in terms of why it would be more beneficial to strike now than to wait. What were they not willing to?
Well, let me give you an answer about that, because that was one of the issues I wanted to tackle. Vladimir Putin always does what he says, and I think we should look into that. And one of our mistakes is to not have understood this for 15 years. In February 2007, during the Munich Security Conference, he said precisely that there must be a line that we, the West, or NATO countries or European Union countries, should not cross. This was clearly said. Now, I'm not saying we haven't heard it. I'm just saying we haven't understood it precisely. And of course, why is he acting now? Well, first of all, because the Minsk protocol, or the Minsk agreement, there were two Minsk agreements, by the way. The first one was in September 2014. The second one in February 2015 was not implemented. That's a reality as well. Of course, it is a reality. And this has a concrete, let's say, responsibility from President Zelensky, who did not want to implement it for a very precise reason, is that his majority was not willing to fulfill it. I mean, there is majority inside the parliament. I'm not saying he didn't want it. I'm not saying there was a standoff or a political posture on that. That's one of the reasons. The second reason is I think that Vladimir Putin was misguided in the way that the international community would react, both the European Union and NATO. And he was feeling that there would not be that consensus. And to be very honest, as a political observer, I am amazed myself on the fact that there's more unity than fragmentation that was expected. I would have thought there would be more fragmentation, and the contrary strikes me as well. So this is, I think, one of the second reason. The third reason, I think, is based on the fact that Vladimir Putin has maybe not one, but various objectives in his campaign in Ukraine. First of all, the first thing is not only based in Kiev. It's not about taking over or putting aside President Zelensky. This is absolutely not priority. The priority of President Putin is to have a grasp on the Black Sea. This is why he is building up a strategy going from Crimea, from west and east, both west to Odessa, east to Mariupol, and to do the linkage between Donetsk, Lugansk, Donbass autonomous region on one side and Transnistria on the other. And of course, it is more on the southern flank that there is a strategic objective for Russia, as Russia wants to be more and more active in the Mediterranean Union. The fleet of the Mediterranean Union, the fleet of the Mediterranean, the Black Sea fleet, is also the fleet for the Mediterranean area, is in Crimea. So these are, I think, one of the major objectives. We can add the fact that Russia wants to control the Danubian River. This is why the conquest of Odessa is strong as well. And of course, wants to bring out the fact that having acted in Georgia in 2008, being present again in Azerbaijan, having been kicked out in 1982 with the peacekeepers after the Karabakh War in November of last year, it is now more and more present on its near border, on its near abroad, as President Putin mentioned it very frequently. And these are strategic objectives. Getting rid of President Zelensky would have been a major win in the beginning, but we see that he is resisting, and I don't see the strategic interest for Russia to have him kicked out now. As I mentioned, none of the pro-Russian leaders want to assume power if Zelensky is put out of the presidential palace.
And that brings to another question. What do you think's going on in these backroom negotiations? And what do you think each side is asking for unnegotiable? And do you think we're close to a resolution?
So when you're speaking about the negotiation, you're mentioning the ones who are happening in Belarus or the various mediation across the world? Because there's two pillars of that.
No,
I will focus.
The ones that are happening in Belarus between Ukraine.
I would say they are not the most essential because they are on a second level track and they are not that decisive. I would argue that in Antalya during the last week, during the Antalya Security Forum, or the Antalya Diplomacy Forum, the meeting between Dmytro Kuleba, the foreign minister of Ukraine, Sergei Lavrov, foreign minister of Russia, and Mevlut Cavusoglu, former minister of Turkey, were more essential. I would assume as well, as we are speaking now, in Roma, there is an important meeting as well with the director of the Central Commission for Foreign Affairs of the Chinese Communist Party, Yang Jiechi, and Jake Sullivan, who is the National Security Counselor or advisor, I think the name is counselor, the title is counselor of the White House, is as essential as well as United States is trying to understand what China is going to do in regards to Russia, and of course preventing a correlation or a pact more than an alliance between Russia and China. Now, let me get to your concrete question. What has been discussed? I have here the 7 Russian demands, and if you want, I can discuss them one by one, and then we can see what is negotiable or not. First of all, and this has been assessed very publicly in diplomatic circles, in mediatical outreach, the neutrality or the so-called Finlandization of the status of Ukraine, therefore demilitarization of Ukraine. That is one line that can be crossed, and I think that President Zelensky has said that he is willing to discuss about this issue. The second issue is the reconnaissance. I don't know if you say that it's in correct English, or the recognition maybe, of the proclaimed Republic of Donetsk and Lugansk, the one DNR and LNR, the ones that President Putin has recognized and who has fueled this special operation, as he called it, invasion, as we witnessed it. I will add that during the last hours, there's a new potential demand in Kherson, which is one of the cities that has been conquered by the Russians in the northeast of Crimea, and there is a possibility that the municipal council proclaims as well a auto-proclaimed republic, KNR, on the same basis of Donetsk and Lugansk. Let's put that aside because this is another core difficulty. Second point, therefore, recognition of the not so independence, but of the status, special status, autonomous status of Donetsk and Lugansk. The third issue, and I will use the words that President Putin mentions, not mine, denazification of the country, which in more precise words would be the ban of Nazi ultra-nationalist rightist party. One is Opobloc. By the way, Opobloc is both Nazi, but sometimes inside you have pro-Russians as well. We are speaking about the Azov battalion inside that perspective. The fourth point leads to the first one, demilitarization of Ukraine, and therefore there will be no tactical weapons And of course, Ukraine would have the same status as Finland, same status as Ireland, same status as Austria, for example. The fifth point, I think it's a very important point, the promise or the official adhesion, non-entrance of Ukraine, non-entry of Ukraine in NATO, on the contrary of what was decided in April 2008 during the Bucharest NATO summit, in which the open door policy was launched, both in the direction of Georgia and the direction of Ukraine. As everyone knows, President Zelensky has said in the last 48 hours, that he was no longer interested in NATO participation. That maybe is one of the positive points that Russians and Ukrainians have mentioned, open to discussion. The 6 points, I would have two more, 6 and 7 points. The recognition of the attachment or the bridge or the status of Crimea, annexion of Crimea. After there was the annexion of Crimea in February 2014. Then there was a referendum in March 2014. President Putin is very itchy on that. He wants to have a full recognition of the appartenance of Crimea to Russia, and he has opened that to a discussion with President Zelensky, which brings me to say that this point, 6 points, and the second point, recognition of a special status for Donetsk, Lugansk, maybe Kherson, would absolutely have, under the constitution of Ukraine, to be discussed with the parliament, that the president cannot, by the constitution, decide himself. It has to be a vote, and therefore this has to be voted, or otherwise there would be a need to change the constitution, as the territorial integrity and the sovereignty of both Crimea and Lugansk and Donetsk are fully pledged inside the constitution, the 7 point. And I think this is something that there's not too much upon which not too much difficulty. The recognition of Russian as the second official language after Ukrainians. I mentioned 70% of Ukrainians speak Russian as a language. Therefore, it would abide by the recognition of that. And on the second point, the abolition of the law restraining the use of Russia, precisely in Donetsk and Lugansk, which was, by the way, one of the reasons why the two republics decided to fight against Ukraine from 2014.
So
broadly, these are the points.
Do we know? Yeah. Do we know what Ukraine wants other than a no-fly zone? Which, good luck.
Well, what Ukraine is willing, or Ukraine is capable of accepting. And I would add maybe another important point, which I would pinpoint to the status of neutrality. I think there should be sort of a bargain, because in diplomacy it's always a bargain, or a troc, I don't know how you say that in English, to say that if there is a non-alliance deal into NATO, there could very well be a perspective of entering the European Union. As you know, this was a demand made by Zelensky. He re-said it today in the Council of Europe. He said it at the European Parliament. And of course, this was discussed during the Versailles summit Monday, during the 11th and the 12th. That was Friday and Saturday. The key of both Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia to Europe. I do have to argue that there's not a consensus on that. I do have to argue that it's not a big thing, as some countries have been asking to enter European Union for 40 years, 45 years, which is the case of Turkey, and or 18 years of North Macedonia, or Albania and Serbia, by the way, 12 years. So what would be the difficulty of promising or starting the negotiation process to enter Ukraine in European Union? Everyone knows, and Ukrainians first of them, that it will take at least 20 years. So it's not a big thing. The question is, would Russia accept that instead of NATO, the perspective of Ukraine entering European Union is on the table? I'm not into Vladimir Putin's head, but
Yeah,
I would
that's
argue the
interesting.
fact. I would argue the fact that it would be, I think, something way more acceptable if the entry of Ukraine in the European Union would be with the obligation of having the status of neutrality. 3 European states have already the status of neutrality: Ireland, Finland, and Austria. Why not
Right.
have an open discussion on the status of Ukraine on that perspective? On that
Now, when you
basis.
say neutrality, do you mean political neutrality, economic neutrality, or
No,
military?
military neutrality. Military neutrality.
Okay.
Written in the constitution, military neutrality, which would be like, for example, Austria not having more than 1% of its GDP for defense, or having a no-go into external operation when it comes to NATO operations. Of course, they're not part of NATO, or in European Union operations.
Yeah. Do you
They
think
can have an army, but not in a way, like very simply, in very simplistic way, not a operational or proactive army.
so? Other than Joe Biden, who apparently he talks to regularly, do you think Zelensky is talking to anybody else with regards to positions put on the table by Russia in these negotiations?
Well,
I think he's talking to people.
Zelensky is speaking to the whole world. I mean, he's speaking.
I know. It's hard to tell.
To be more precise,
Yeah.
yesterday, Zelensky spoke to Slovakian president, he spoke to Lithuanian president, he spoke to Prime Minister of Hungary, he spoke to again President of France.
But what do you think he's trying to do? Speaking to everybody, he's just bored.
Building consensus, building consensus, and having a strong, let's say, convergent diplomatic stance. To speak with Russia, you have to be united. Otherwise, Russia will take advantage of the weakness of each of us. Therefore, President Zelensky has to have the assurance that everyone is on the same track when it comes to a certain number of issues. Again, there was a narrative. Sorry?
Yeah, we have a lot more clear idea as to what the Russians want than what the Ukrainians want. I mean, if we could see what their list of
what the Russian wants, I think, is very, if I may, what the Russian wants is very clear. I think they want the promise that Ukraine will never enter NATO. By the way, everyone knew that Ukraine will never enter NATO because this was a no-go. So it's sort of absurd. It's sort of absurd because we didn't write it. By the way, we cannot write because in any international organization, you cannot forbid someone to apply. It's the contrary of the philosophy of any union or any organization. So we cannot say you can enter or you cannot enter. Because if we do that's
why I thought this was all a non-starter, and I'm surprised it even popped off the way it did, because I thought everybody I know in Washington who I talked to said NATO membership.
No one serious ever said that Georgia and Ukraine went to NATO. No one serious.
Yeah, I know. It's weird. So I'm not going to keep you that much longer, Emmanuel, but we have
I see this question. I see this written questions. If you want me to address,
I can give you some written questions. We got that one. What about Putin becoming? Yeah, what about Putin becoming the champion of European dissidents? Those who are fighting against the Davos and Chicago School of Economics ideologies. I was just saying, well, it's going to be hard for him to fight to represent. I don't know, to platform dissidents when he's kind of isolated at this point with respect to the platforms.
Well, is he that much isolated? I'm not sure. That is precisely the question. Let me just, if we can have a look at but look at the vote at the NATO. United Nations General Assembly. 141 countries said yes. 5 said no. These are the allies. I do have to mention them: Eritrea, North Korea, Cuba, Syria, Belarus, and of course Russia. But this is the important part. 35. I will say it in French, and you will translate it for me, Rachel. Abstentions. We said in English.
Abstention. Yep.
35 abstentions, okay, and 12 non-participation, which is a very, let's say, anachronic way of saying that you don't know what to say no, but you don't. It's the how do you say that? The blank chair, or the la chaise vide, politique la chaise vide. I always say it.
Yeah, the empty chair.
Yeah, but what is important is that among the 35 abstentionist nations, 17 come from Africa, and that's important because I think there's a sort of Russia.
There's a lockdown on that. When we talk about giving voices to dissidents in Europe, I mean, you need platforms for that. And right now, he's kicked off all the GAFAMs, all of the digital platforms that were supposed to democratize.
No. I was coming to that. I was just saying that he has allies. That's one issue. For example, Morocco did not participate in the vote, which is important because Morocco wants to play in a more important game.
Or Mexico. Mexico too.
Or Mexico. Or Brazil.
Yeah.
Or Mexico or Brazil. Or of course China and India. India is important. India did advocated for its abstention. India is the first.
India always takes kind of a non-aligned position.
Well, I think India is obliged to do it for Russia for one reason, is that it is the biggest buyer of Russian weapons in the world. $8 billion last year. 23% of what Russia sells in the world goes to India. And the second one is China with 5 billion, 18%. Some figures. Now, coming to your point about the vision or the capacity of Russia to fuel a sort of ambition or counter narrative to Western ideas or European leadership. I think Vladimir Putin failed on that as well. Some of the leaders on whom he could count on, President of Poland, Duda, Prime Minister of Hungary, Orban, a certain number of more illiberal statesmen were obliged to say they would not
fall into line with NATO alliance.
They would go with NATO alliance. This is the case of Recep Tayyip Erdogan, but they would put pressure on Turkey, put pressure on Russia as well, vote the sanctions, and of course abide by European unity. So he hasn't managed to fuel a sort of opposition or internal opposition. That does not mean that in the near future there may be internal opposition inside the country. We are hearing, we are listening, we are witnessing a certain number of former or actual FSB secret internal intelligence officers saying that that Russia is going into the wall. There's a certain number of oligarchs who are saying that they have now they have lost enough money. This is the CEO of Rosneft, for example, which is a strong pillar, a strong actor. And of course, this will have, I think, the most pressure on Russia comes from that.
Yeah. So do you think this is going to be over anytime soon? Or how long do you think this is going to go on? Just any guess? We could take bets on this. I could just make a list.
I'm not Madame Irma, and I do not do divination, as you say in French. But
do you like Las Vegas? Do you like Las Vegas? We could put some.
I would therefore maybe give a more practical reason. Well, first of all, the climate issue is very important. In Ukraine, there is this so-called Raputsita, which is I'm translating it in my head in French, from French to English. La saison des mauvaises routes, bad road season, which happens in spring. Well, normal. The Ukrainian roads are non-asphalted. They are dust, and they transform into mud. And it's logical that you have a 200,000 military deployment with a lot and huge material, very heavy material, 40 tons, of course. If you cannot have the mobility, it's very difficult to fuel an attack, and it's very easy to be attacked. That's one issue. Second issue, and we are witnessing that now in the last days, there's a decrease in temperature, which is, of course, a problem or a handicap for both armed forces, both Ukrainians and both Russians.
Sure.
A tank can be transformed into a, how do you say, a frigidaire. I don't know how you say that in English. Refrigerator. And of course, to keep active the military deployment, you need fuel. And if there is no longer fuel, and if the fuel cannot go to the military deployment, then the army, as strong as it is totally blocked. That's one issue. The second issue is diplomatic pressure. France is one-sided diplomacy. Naftali Bennett, Prime Minister of Israel, has also mentioned or is willing to play this mediating role. Turkey with Recep Tayyip Erdogan as well. We will see what comes out of the Rome discussion. But even though China and Russia are linked more than an alliance, the alliance is so-called no-limits alliance, strong as steel, as Wang Yi, Minister of Foreign Affairs, mentioned it. But of course, China is obsessed by the idea that after Russia, it may be its turn. So to have a mediating role would be very positive, or would give the impression that China would be in its strategic facilitation, mediation facility. The narrative of the Chinese diplomacy is maximum retenue, maximum ease when we say maximum pressure. So again, there's two ways of tackling the problem with Russia. I think the United States and the European Union are trying to avoid a rapprochement between Russia and China. Again, this action is doing exactly the contrary, since Russia, they're doing exactly what we wanted to prevent. And of course, on the other side, Russia and China are very wary or very eager to avoid a rapprochement between United States, and European Union, or to reboost NATO. And this is precisely what is happening. And this is the utmost contradiction of President. This is the absolutely contradiction. When everyone thought that NATO was dead, the French president said that. Well, NATO is back on track. And Vladimir Putin mentioned to reboost NATO or to give emphasis to European Union. This is extraordinary. Amazing results.
I mean, do you think there's a better chance of escalation or de-escalation? Are we on the downslide with this, or is there a chance it's going to?
No, I think we are on the escalation when it comes to Ukraine. The military operations are not finished. 220,000 troops inside the country will not leave by the day because they have conquered territory. They will keep the territory that they have maintained. You have to have a discussion on what basis the negotiation happens. Is it on the basis of before the 24th February invasion, or on the basis of the land that they have conquered? Again, maybe tomorrow Odessa, maybe tomorrow Mariupol. The linkage between Donbass, Crimea, Transnistria, all of the northern shore of the Black Sea, the Russification of the Azov Sea, the city of Kharkiv, the city of Dnipro, east of the Dnieper River. These are subjects which will not be treated in the next days, maybe in the next weeks, more surely in the next months. Then there is escalation outside of Ukraine. That's another question. There may be some who argue that after Ukraine, Russia will go go beyond the red line, which would be to attack a European Union or a NATO country.
Well, that would be World War III. So
it would be impossible.
Whose interest that would be in?
It would be impossible for a very pragmatic reason. Russia has put almost what it has on the table. Russian army is more or less, it is said to be 900,000, 1 million of both conscription and drafted and professional army. In reality, it's not more than 700,000. If you consider that you have 220,000 in Ukraine, that's more than half of the terrestrial capacity of Russia. If Russia would want to follow on a Poland or a Romania or a Moldova or a Baltic front, some say, or some argue Sweden and Finland, they would not have the military capacity to do so. And this is why they are calling for China to bring in weapons that, by the way, they already sold in the past. So I don't see absolutely accurate the idea of having this new front outside of Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, just as a sidebar, there's so much conflicting information. I mean, I heard that Financial Times report about Russia asking China for military weapons, and then it was denied.
Yeah, it was denied by China. It was denied by China.
It was, sorry, who?
It was denied by China. It was not denied by the Financial Times. Financial Times wrote the mention that Russia demanded, and China denied that Russia demanded to him. That's normal. That's a normal diplomatic stance.
Yeah, I don't know. There's so much contradictory information there, and then we have
that's the war. That's the
influence war on social media.
That's
one.
That's
I mean, the way it is.
That's right. Absolutely, it's the way it is.
The office for you, Emmanuel.
Yes. No, I think there was I saw a written question about Germany defense GDP. Can you raise that question?
Yeah, it was a chance about at the Munich Security Conference. That one.
No, there was one about the GDP.
Oh, Germany. You know what? Yeah, I got it. What the shift? This one. It's this one.
Yes. So what do you make of the significant shift in German defense policy?
And the €100 billion fund for new toys, in other words, weapons.
Okay.
Seems the idea of an EU army being made real by German remilitarization. Do you think?
Well, first of all, I would address this question saying that it is not totally done. Chancellor Olaf Scholz mentioned the fact that next year he will double the budget of defense, more or less 50 billion, and this is the figure of 100 billion. It's not totally done because it hasn't been voted neither by the Bundestag, neither by the Bundesrat, upper and lower chamber. It is just a mindset. It was just a proposition. It has not been totally accepted. Second of all,
today they wanted F-35s, 40 of them or something.
No,
today
second of all, the issue is not about this 100 billion. It's the fact that Germany is going on track to have a 2% GDP in defense. And of course, this brings me to say that other countries are doing the same thing. Denmark is willing to have this by 2033. Austria is going from 0.74 to 1%. Poland, of course, is going on the same perspective. Now, the issue, and this would be my real answer to the question, I do, as a very proactive European defense policy defender, think that we have made a huge, how do you say that? A huge jump in the idea of having more robust and more perennial defense policy. Now, the problem is, if you put more money on defense, but if you don't buy European material, and this brings me to the F-35 that you mentioned, then there's a problem. It's not strategic autonomy, or it's not European strategic autonomy. President Macron
why are they buying F-35s? Like, why would they do that?
They're not doing anything else than other 11 European countries who have decided to buy F-35s. Netherlands, Spain, Italy, Belgium, Denmark, and of course, now Germany. They're not the only ones. And the problem is that if we want to put more money for European defense, and if the only solution is to buy American material, there's no need to see the contradiction. It's a good thing, but I would reckon, and I would hope, that in the future, real European strategic autonomy would be to put more money on defense, to buy, or to have the obligation to buy European-made material. And there's a very important contradiction when Germany, Spain, and France are building a European aircraft, SCAF, the Système de Combat de l'Aérien du Futur, in English, Future Aircraft Combat System. And at the same time, they're saying we're going to build it, but it's not important because we're going to buy F-35. That's a huge contradiction.
I don't know who's running the show, but we live in interesting times, Emmanuel. Thank you so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure having you.
Pleasure.
And it's been great having you all in English.
I hope I responded to all of your questions. There was the last question.
You did. Yeah,
No, there was the last question about Zelensky and nuclear. I will be very brief on that.
You wanted...
No, there was a question about nuclear and Munich.
I'll go. There you
the
go.
Week before the invasion to go nuclear.
Yeah,
well,
at the Munich Security Conference the week before the invasion, he threatened to go nuclear if the West does not provide security assurances. That was one of the final red lines.
That is a narrative. He didn't really say it in that very precise way, but he was saying that, of course, Ukraine was a nuclear power till 1994, and that it handed back the weapons, the Russian weapons, or the Soviet weapons it had in Ukraine, just like Kazakhstan. And I think we must be very careful about this, because this is one of the reasons why Russia said that it was fueling its operation. And I'm not sure there is a reality. I think it's a narrative, and it's as bold as Colin Powell when he came to the United Nations and he said that that Iraq had a nuclear program, which fueled the massive military invasion of Iraq. I don't see it really concretely as a beginning of a reality.
Yeah, there's no adage that says that. I don't know how true it is in this case, but a lot of conflicts, including wars, are caused essentially by poor communication, misunderstandings of what each side is saying and means. And I don't know. You think that intelligence would fill in those gaps? That each side has really good intelligence? They don't just have to go off somebody's word?
No. And this is a very interesting issue, because in the last hours, as you may have seen or read, high intelligence officer from FSB, Internal Service, under the authority of Alexander Bortnikov, the one...
The Russian FSB, not the KGB.
Yeah, FSB. No. KGB does not exist anymore. It has been replaced by SVR.
No, but Ukraine has the KGB.
Oh, no, SBU. Yeah, no, they have SBU.
So we're talking Russian FSB.
Russian intelligence. Okay. Russian intelligence officer, namely two. Sergei Beseda is the head of the foreign section of FSB, and is adjunct Anatoly Bolyuk, which has been put under custody. And there's a huge reflection on the poor intelligence that was put in hand of the Russian leadership. Some argue on the fact that, of course, when you want to legitimize an operation, you have to give the impression that the war would be easy, that Zelensky will not resist, that the Ukrainian army is poorly skilled, poorly weaponized, and that it would be easy as Chechnya was proposed. You do maybe remember that the Minister of Defense in 1994, at the beginning, the first Chechnya war, said that with one paratrooper regiment, he will take over Grozny. 5,000 killed, Russians killed 1 year and 9 months after. He said that, of course, when in regards to Chechnya, to Chechnya, Afghanistan was a bagatelle. I will say it in French. Comparé à Afghanistan, comparé, oui c'est ça, comparé à la Tchétchénie, l'Afghanistan est une bagatelle.
Yeah, compared to Chechnya, Afghanistan was a cakewalk, essentially.
Was a cakewalk, absolutely. Yeah. So I think we are in the same stance there, and maybe poor intelligence, which was brought up to Russian leadership, may have misguided their perception, of misguided their capacity to overrun the country. We are in the 19th day, and the issue was to take over in 48 hours.
Was it? Because it seems to me like advancing at 20, 30 kilometers a day is still pretty quick. We're so used to American style shock and awe, which just basically levels everything. And it's definitely not what we're seeing here.
Yeah, but
Isn't this just normal? We're so, like I said, we're so used to the American shock and awe that we don't really know what a conventional advance in a war looks like anymore, because it seems to me this is pretty classic. Is it really that bad? I mean, in terms of the progress the Russians are making on a daily basis.
Yes, it is bad on behalf of the casualties they are having. And of course, due to American intelligence, I do not believe in the 12,000 wounded death that they have, but I do not believe neither in the Russian Russian figures, 500. So it is bad on both sides, by the way, both Ukrainians and Russians. This is a high intensity war. It's not no longer a war which was fought in Syria. There was only 5,000 Russians in Syria. It's not a counterinsurgency operation as France has experienced it in Sahel, or that the Russians have experienced, for example, in places like Libya with the so-called Wagner group. We are speaking about a high intensity operation in which are involved the most modern warfare from both sides, both from Russia and both from NATO countries. We are experiencing a war in which you have the level of intensity is of army groups, and therefore it's no longer a very rapid, as I say, asymmetric capacity. On the paper, Ukraine may seem asymmetric because the Ukrainian army is only of 200,000 soldiers, when the Russian deployment is of 200,000 soldiers. But of course, when you have on the same level the same type of weapons, do have in mind that the Russians and the Ukrainians were trained at the same time, and that 30% of the Russian population is linked to Ukraine. So you have Ukrainian generals who have links with Russian generals, who have trained together, who have been graduated from military academy together. So everyone knows how each one fights. It's a fratricide war. The difference, or the let's say the new posture is that there have now an Ukrainian army which has been skilled with Occidental training, skills and training, with very accurate and very effective weapons. You know, Afghanistan was won with Stingers, because the Stingers missiles, the Sol-Air missiles, destroyed almost each time helicopters. I think this war will be won with the Javelins, the American Javelins, who are destroying a lot of armed vehicles, a lot of artillery, or a lot of tanks. And this war will be won by drones as well. We are experiencing also the continuation of the non-armed war, as everyone may not have heard. Just 1 week after the military operation was launched, Turkey managed to sell and to bring 20 armed drones to Ukraine. So there's, I think, various layers or various pillars in the war which is acting. And again, you are right. We are only speaking about 20 days, 19 days to be precise. Wars do longer.
Yeah, they tend to last a little longer than 20 days. Who knows how long this one will last, but Emmanuel, thank you so much for giving us your insight today.
I hope I will not have to come back to explain it again.
To explain it again, especially in the heat of the operation.
I hope not.
Yeah, well, hopefully next time you come back, we'll be talking about the end result,
peace
or the
process.
wrap up, whatever.
I hope.
Yeah, let's hope at least. Thank you so much. Emmanuel Dupuy, president of the Institute for Prospective and Security in Europe, based in Paris, France. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
And thank you to everybody for joining me on this show. It's been a blast. We will be back again tomorrow. Tomorrow we have Maxime Bernier. He is the former Canadian Foreign Affairs and Industry Minister, and he's also the president of the People's Party or the leader, founder, I guess president, no, probably just leader and founder of the People's Party of Canada. He's going to talk about the Ukraine situation with us tomorrow. He's also going to talk about the Canadian truckers. Remember that? That was the last crisis. That was the last obsession. That was the last group of people we were supposed to hate. Now it's Russians. Now we're into the Russian era. But we'll be back to the truckers probably. COVID's coming up too, so the anti-vaxxers, they'll be targeted too. It's hard to get everything straight. Who are we supposed to hate today? Next week? It changes so quickly. So we'll be back again tomorrow. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Rachel Marsden, and I'm based here in Paris, France. And thanks for coming to hang out with us. And thank you also for your questions. Remember, you can follow us on Twitter, Unredacted Show. You can follow us on Twitch at The Real Rachel Marsden. You can follow us on TikTok at Rachel.Marsden. You can also find us on Facebook for Facebook Live. And you can find me on LinkedIn. If you add me, I'll add you back, and you can follow my lives on there as well. For those of you who sent questions today, thank you so much for your questions. Again, feel free anytime on any of our platforms to send through questions for either me or my guests. They are top level experts in their fields, and they're here for you. So always feel free to just fire away. All right, so we'll be back again tomorrow. Again, you can catch me at rachelmarsden.com, and you can find all the viewing information for the show at the top of the page there. You can also catch my columns. I write a couple of columns a week for different media outlets. So please feel free to follow me there. And have a great morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you happen to be in the world. And I'll see you again tomorrow. Have a good night.